Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be, or good evening or good night. This is Jen at JensArtyInclinations, a place to create, share and play.
Hi everyone. In keeping with playing with a few more steampunk motifs, I had these little balloon party bags. Gosh, I've had them for ages and I just love, that vintage sort of style. So, I don't know, I just added a few more bits of play and I thought I'd bring you along and show you what I did. And I think I can make these work in the little steampunk ish sort of journal that I'm working on at the moment. All right, so I didn't want the full box bottom on these particular bags. I wanted them to be more like a bit of a library pocket, but I kept the concertina side. So that's just showing you how I put them together. I just kind of folded up the bottom. All right, so I pulled them apart really easy. They came apart very easily, so that was terrific. Also made it easier for me to ink them. You know how I love inking everything inside. So then all I did was I cut up the bottom. So I just used the existing fold lines that were there, cut across, and I just cut it back a little bit so that there was a little bit less bulk. So I'm cutting just under the fold line and just leaving that last little tab on. So then I went around and I inked everything. So I'm kind of sliding along and then flipping it out, different directions, different ways. Popped a little thumb hole in top. And I tried to remember the order of how I built these in this particular one. Just again, inking around the little thumb hole. And I also found using a combination of inks, so walnut stain or pumice stone, and then vintage photo just gave them a little bit more depth. But in this third one, I just did vintage photo because, I was getting bored then of inking. So then, as you can see, you can just fold in your sides and then fold that bottom up. And then that's how I'm making my little pockets. So they're nice roomy pockets, but still flat enough to fit in a journal. And then what I did was I added all sorts of little bits and bobs on top so that they're just as thick as the box bottom anyway. But that's fine. All right, so I decided I'd pop a couple of eyelets in the top. I did this on each of them, and I felt like that gave it a little bit of a uniform look. And all I did was tied string through them. But you could tie string and put charms on them, or you could leave them just as is. You could put something around underneath those little eyelets. All right, now I just showed you the embossing pad. You can use your embossing pad, but I decided to use my pumice stone ink to use with my stamps, because what I actually did was embossing, but I figured that way it wouldn't completely stick and you'd still see some of the colour underneath. That's my theory. And anyway, I quite like how it turned out. And look, I always get my embossing powder everywhere. So I've started using this leftover box lid for it. And with the steampunk, I'm also learning that I'm kind of mixing up my embossing powders a bit. So this is copper, but it's also got a little bit of black left over, like black specks left over in it. I'm rubbing off a little bit that was just, excess there. And then, as you can see, it changed there. So this is me just applying the heat gun. So I've done all the top bit, which was the clock stamp, and then I'm adding a text stamp to the bottom. And on this one, I put a bit of, this is black, just plain black. So then I've put that on, and then I've popped the copper that was left over. I've popped that on top, and I just am keeping that piece of paper in the bottom of the box. And see, it's all just falling off onto that. So it's not really wasting it because I am going back to that, and I do like the mix of colours. I feel like it's a bit more grungy, and I don't want them to be uniform colours in the steampunk-ish style of stuff that I'm doing at the moment. All right, I had these, little texture stamps. So I popped a bit of that on as well. And this final one, I'm really making sure I'm getting lots of ink so it's nice and wet, because I did want that to be quite bold. Now, did I go with silver or did I just go with what was in the bottom of the box? No, just what was in the bottom of the box. There you go. So again, just tipping that off, and you can see that that got some lovely coverage and also some hole punches. But that's fine. I just get messier and messier, especially when I'm in the middle of challenges. I get even messier, so I'm really trying hard to make sure I clean up my desk a bit. I did find, grabbing a box of scraps and things like Meg suggested and Lee over at Lee Creates suggested, I did find that that has been a fairly good way at the beginning of the month. So I've sort of got my Junk Journal January scrap box separate, and I've got a bit of a Steampunk scrap box as well. I'm finding that that is a little bit easier. I mean, I quite often work on trays because then you can move them around. And especially when you've got little kids or you're caring for others in the home, then you can move them. All right, these are fabulous stamps that I got from Witchcraft You Do, and they've got that metallic look. So I used that on one of them. And on another one, I used one of my die-cut butterflies. On this one, this is actually a cake patty pan that I embossed over. And as you can see, I used quite a few different colours. So I layered that and then I put some together. And then I had a little ticket. So I thought that'd be cute, poking out underneath, because that, has a bit of a metallic look. And of course, one of Tracy Fox's over at Foxy Design, one of her labels. I love her labels. Don't we all love them? And I know that we see them a lot, but, it's a little bit like in the Tim Holtz category. There are some things we all just love, right? And so handy. Love a label, love numbers to just, really finish things off. That's the turquoise embossing that I used on the edge there. So it's almost like a patina. Really cool. But yeah, it was just slightly chunkier than a normal embossing powder, as were the gold and the silver and the copper that I've used underneath it. I used a mix of chunky and non-chunky, and that sort of gave it a real rustic metal look. So I thought, anyway. Just using my art glitter glue, pressing it down. I do find once you emboss pieces, you kind of have to just hold them to make sure that your glue is holding them properly. All right, finally, just putting the label on. Now, I probably need to add a bit more black to each of these, although once I do the pages, I will do that then if I need to. But in the meantime, I did just grab some number stamps. These were from one of Witchcraft You Do stamp sets, and I used those to stamp down. So that's what I'm tapping the bottom there, because I'm like, see, you could use, a steampunk cutout hat. That's a die-cut butterfly, all sorts of things. But yeah, they're the Witchcraft You Do set that I'm using for this one. And I'm just using black soot. I'm not being too fussed and putting it on an acrylic block for this particular one, because I wasn't quite wanting it to stamp perfectly. I wanted it to stamp a little bit. So I've used one of the numbers, and then I used another one in that set that's ref with a number, like reference. So I used half of it on the left there, and I used the other half underneath the label. By the way, when I stuck that label down, I did have to squish it up a little bit because I didn't want it to be completely in line with the embossing, and that just sort of helps give it a bit off centre as well. So there you are. There's all three that I've done. I'll stop doing them now because, I'm sure I'll use those paper bags for other things as well throughout this journal. Aren't they just beautiful balloons? As I said, just from the $2 shop. It was a whole set of party stuff in this style. So I grabbed cake toppers, I grabbed these, I grabbed something else as well. So you may see that a little bit. But again, you can doll up these little bags that we get so easily. And we get these sorts of things from $2 shops. You know, sometimes they do the stripy candy cane ones and sometimes they do just the plain ones. So, yeah, it's really fun just to doll up a paper bag. And if they're too thick for your journal, well, you can turn them into a flatter pocket like I did. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you're enjoying seeing me learning this style, and I'll see you next time. I'd love it if you could leave me a comment below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. And of course, please subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you next time. And in the meantime, keep creating. Enjoy!